I'm very pleased today to introduce our main speaker, who is also a good friend and that I have the privilege of working with on the Parklands of Floyd's Fork Board of Directors, and that's Dan Jones. Dan is no stranger to Rotary. He's having presented to our club on several occasions. However, for those of you that may not know Dan, let me tell you just a little bit about him. Dan is a native of Louisville. He holds 2 degrees from Yale University, both a Bachelor of Arts and also a master's degree in forestry. Dan also holds a PhD from Indiana University. Early in his career, Dan taught world history and history of the American West at the University of Louisville, and he continues to teach a course today at U of L. However, in our community, Dan is most well known for his leadership in developing and bringing the largest new park system in North America to Louisville, the Parklands of Floyd's Fork. Dan founded 21st Century Parks back in 2004 and led virtually every aspect of the Parklands: fundraising, design, development, construction, and now the day-to-day management of the 4,000-acre 4-park system. Dan currently serves as the chairman of the Parklands of Floyd's Fork, and in just a moment, you'll receive a great update from him on the current status of this 100% donor-supported park system. Dan and his wife, Lisa, are the parents of 4 children. Dan enjoys hiking, camping, skiing, running, and reading. So Dan, with that, welcome to the Rotary Club of Louisville. The podium is yours.
Great. Well, thanks, Luke. Thanks, Alyssa. Thanks, Chris. And thanks to all of you for having me today. Like all of us, I've been on a lot of Zoom meetings recently. This is the first time that I've given a presentation like this. So we think we've worked out all the bugs in the tech. We'll find that out in a minute when I pull up my PowerPoint. I do want to just say a couple of things. First of all, interesting in the remarks about Mr. Carroll, my mother was in the last graduating class from Atherton that was all women. So presumably she graduated the year before he did. So that was kind of just completely random, but interesting to me personally. So, when Luke and I started talking about this, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks ago, he asked me if I would talk specifically about the Parklands in the time of COVID. And so that is what I'm going to do. I'm going to start with a short introduction, just in case some people aren't familiar or as familiar with the Parklands as others. I'll just try to give you a sense in a nutshell of what's going on there. And then I'm going to really talk about our response and what we've learned. It's been an incredibly interesting time, very challenging in certain ways. We had our first board meeting yesterday. We meet quarterly. And so, we essentially, between our February board meeting and our May board meeting, everything changed. And so yesterday was a very interesting meeting. But I'm going to move and see if I can pull up my PowerPoint and continue talking. And Alyssa or Luke, just tell me if anything is not appearing to be working as it should, but assuming it does, I'm going to go through it. And then afterwards, I'll speak for probably 15, 20 minutes, and then we'll have time for Q&A after that. And I'll be very interested to hear people's questions. So again, thanks very much for having me. I'm delighted to be back. I miss the energy of the Rotarians in the room because I could feel it somewhat on this, but that's always one of the nice things about speaking to the Rotarians is just the sort of the passion and energy that we find in the room. So, all right, here I go. All right, is that showing up as it should?
Not yet.
Oh, hang on a second. All right, here. Still not showing up?
Not yet.
All right. All right, well, I'm not exactly sure what's going on, but I can give my talk without, most of these are slides that were just sort of guiding the talk to help with the fact that, I'm talking to you through Zoom. So I'm just gonna march through it and we'll see how it goes. So the title is The Parklands of Floyd's Fork in the Time of Coronavirus. And again, I want to do 4 things today. I want to give you just an overview of the Parklands of Floyd's Fork. Um, and all right, now my screen has changed again. Let me try this one more time. Is that coming through now? Ah, perfect. Okay, so all right, great. All right, so I'm going to give you an overview of the Parklands. I'm going to talk a little bit about, everybody's world changed, right, in early March. Ours did too. And then I really want to zero in on what we learned because, everybody is going through a crash course in crisis management. We went through that, and I think we learned some useful things. I'm trained as a teacher. I can't help but try to take whatever I've learned and put it in a teaching format, and sort of done that. And then I want to talk a little bit about the results because in the middle of all the bad news, there's been some really astonishing things that have happened in the Parklands of Floyd's Fork that are good news. I can't talk about the Parklands without remembering my dad, who was my partner in this endeavor, David Jones, who passed away last September. So I just, there's a lot of credit in all this that goes to him more than anybody, really. So I just want to thank him again. And we all miss him a lot, and we miss my mom a lot. But he was an incredible presence in many things in Louisville, but very much so together with me and in the Parklands. So in terms of the overview, we say every project should have a big idea. And our big idea for the Parklands was very simple. And that was, starting in the 1890s, Louisville built a remarkable park system under the guidance of really the father of urban parks in the United States, Frederick Law Olmsted Sr. And between the early 1890s and sort of the 1910s and early 20s, Louisville created Olmsted's last great work, which was our park system. And Olmsted believed that parks should be, by the end of his life, that they should be designed systemically, not just as a single park, but as a system of parks, and that parks were city shaping. And so, the first premise of the Parklands is that parks are city shaping infrastructure. This is Central Park in New York, Olmsted's first and still most famous creation. Created in the 1850s when Manhattan was, we're looking south in this picture, when Manhattan was 30 blocks south. And yet they had the temerity to call it Central Park. And the idea was that it would be city shaping infrastructure that made this dynamic urban place livable. And of course it did, still does. And so that was his first system. Louisville was actually his last system, his last project that he did. And when he came to Louisville in the 1890s, Louisville was about the size of that small white blob in the center of the image. And he laid out 3 parks, Cherokee, Iroquois, and Shawnee, and connecting parkways. And then the transparent oval reflects the fact that the city grew around them. And so again, the Parklands, very simple. Our big idea is do that again. And what you see in green in kind of the southeastern part of the city is the Parklands of Floyd's Fork. That is a realistic image of all the land that we assembled. And of course, the broader transparent oval reflects the fact that, really, we're behind where Louisville was in the 1890s. The city had already grown out there, but the idea was to get the infrastructure in ahead of growth. We've done that successfully, and create a new vision of the urban edge. It's a big project. We raised over $130 million in capital, an endowment, $35 million. We had some growth in that. A lot of that has obviously gone away with the recent market change. We did over 80 separate land transactions to connect a 20-mile long corridor, totals about 3,700 acres. In terms of the timeline, we finished our master plan in 2008, broke ground in 2010, and finished it in 2016, which is very fast. And it very unusually, while the city is our partner in this, they hold 2 seats on our board and brought some property into the project. The project was created by and is managed by a private 501c3 that's responsible for running the park. And Luke alluded to this. We are a donor and visitor supported public park, which is a very unusual model. And it's done. Just a couple of pictures to give you a sense. Again, this is what the site of Beckley Creek Park and the Creekside Center looked like when we bought the property. This is what it looks like now. This is the site of the Brown-Forman Silo Center when we bought the property. And this is what it looks like now. Just to give you a sense of the transformation of the landscape. Obviously, these are only 2 places out of 3,700 acres, but they give you a sense of what was done. We created 4 parks: Beckley Creek, Pope Lick, little connecting piece called the Strand. The red line is the Louisville Loop, the multi-use bike trail that runs the entire length of the park, and then Turkey Run and Broad Run in the south. Just a couple. Visitation. I mean, one of the things Luke always says, this project has been a success, and I don't say that to brag. I just say it because it has been. You can see the visitation. Last year was a record at 3.1 million visits. That puts us in the top 40 most visited urban parks in the country in Louisville. So, and then you'll see down at the bottom, this year, obviously, we've had a lot of visitation as well, which I'll talk about again later. Just a few photos, again, in case anybody hadn't seen it. This is a section of the Louisville Loop. This is our education director, Curtis Carmen. We have a great outdoor education program focused on Title I schools. So we bring in kids from all over the city and also surrounding counties. These are just happy kids in the park and happy fishermen in the park. That's actually an ADA accessible fishing pier. The point being that the Parklands is accessible to everybody, regardless of who they are, where they're from, what their physical abilities are. All right, so that's just a kind of brief overview of the park itself and the project. Hopefully that catches everybody up. So what happened to us with COVID? And again, like everybody else, our world changed. And I've just put a little timeline here. I was a Chinese language major in college. I lived in China, so I followed the Chinese reaction to COVID very closely, and was, I think, disturbed, like a lot of us were, at the kind of level of almost violence that the Chinese government applied to that. But in hindsight, it was clear that they were as scared as everybody else was, and they dealt with it, according to their, sort of methods different than ours. But the result was that starting in kind of early February, I was realizing that a changed world was coming. And in mid-February, I put a hiring freeze in place. We typically hire a lot of seasonal workers, and spoke to Dave Morgan, our president, to say, what do we need to do to get ready for COVID? And so by late February, he and I were talking about, essentially, how do we manage the park? We wanted to keep it open, but how do we manage the park safely, first for our staff and then for our visitors? Same thing with downtown. And equally importantly, half of our revenue comes from events. We have a wedding business, a corporate outing business in the park that supplies about a quarter of our revenue. And then we run 3 fundraisers. And the anticipation, based on what was happening in other states, was that half of our revenue was going to collapse. And that's pretty catastrophic if you're a donor and visitor supported organization. So Dave put together a team. Again, Dave Morgan, our president, had our first meeting on March the 3rd. We quickly closed downtown. We began to close vulnerable amenities in the park. We closed our playgrounds first, and then our dog park. We shut down, obviously, our wedding business and our field trip business, or field trip, it's not really a business, but we do have, people who pay for field trips. We had to close all of that down. And then the last 2 things we closed, we kept the bathrooms open as long as we felt safe, and ultimately we did close them. The city has not closed the bathrooms in the public parks, so we didn't have to do that, but we just felt that as an abundance of caution for our visitors that we needed to do that. We closed our downtown office like everybody else. But fundamentally, our first thing was we wanted to keep the park open. And so we had to figure out how to safely do that. But we did this, tremendous pivot in early March around operations. We broke all of our teams out in the park into teams of 2 to make sure that they could socially distance, and so on. And then by mid-March, we had completely rebuilt our budget. Our president and our CFO, they're both CPAs. They basically did what they call zero-based budgeting. 2 months ago, I didn't know what that meant, but that means you basically take it down to zero and build it from scratch. And we cut a third out of our budget. We secured cash support through the second quarter, so we had enough time to figure out what to do, in terms of fundraising. And then by late March, we had a new operating model in place, a new fundraising model in place. And since that time, we've been working on, the execution of that. So what did we learn in all this? And again, this is where the teacher side of my brain kicks in. And I've tried to distill this down into 3 basic lessons that I think, frankly, can be applied in times of crisis, and they can be applied in ordinary times as well. But the first one, I was in the Navy, and one of the things they teach you in the Navy in terms of crisis is to follow the training. And so, a lot of what you do is train over and over again around the kinds of things that might happen to you. And so, the first lesson is to follow the training. The second is to trust the team. And then the third is to measure results. Obviously, that's very important in ordinary times. But when you're changing things quickly, you really have to get feedback to ensure that the changes you've made are working. And so I'm going to drill down a little bit on the first and the third ones of these, but I want to start with follow the training. So Peter Drucker, who's a management guru, is somebody I've read a lot, and he has a great book that's called The 5 Most Important Questions You Will Ever Ask Your Organization. And those questions is, what is our mission? Who is our customer? What does the customer value? What is our plan? And what are the results? So we ask these questions of ourselves as a team almost every day. And then we periodically go through training as a team around these questions, sort of, once a year or a couple times a year, depending on that. And so the mission of the Parklands of Floyd's Fork is that we serve as stewards entrusted to preserve and sustain unexcelled parklands that reflect the needs and values of our whole community. So the first thing we had to ask ourselves in this crisis is, not does that mission change, but how do we need to adapt that mission in order to continue it in a time of crisis? And I'll come back in a minute to sort of, what we did. The second is, who is our customer? Well, we define our customer, or really what we call our visitors, around what I describe as the 90% park user. And what that means is essentially everybody. But in the parks world, a lot of amenities are 10% uses. So a baseball complex would be an example of a 10% use. 10% uses are very important in the parks world, but we decided that we were going to design and build our park system for the 90%. This is very Olmstedian. If you've ever been to Central Park in New York City, and if you have, next time you go, whenever we can do that again, just sit on a bench for 15 minutes and watch the park flow by. And what you will see is a whole bunch of people doing random and individualized things. They're running, they're walking, they're sitting on a blanket, reading a book, having a picnic, throwing a Frisbee. They're with their significant other. They just broke up with their significant other, and they're having a soulful walk. That's the 90% user. And that's really the way in which we design the parklands. Things like the egg lawn. A lawn is a great 90% use because people can do all kinds of different things there. And then if you marry that with a great trail system so that people can combine a hike or a bike ride, and picnic pavilions and playgrounds, then they begin to put together their own use of the park. And that's really what we wanted to happen. And that's what a 90% park does. So that's how we define our audience, our visitors, our customers. So what is the customer value? Well, our operating mission is that the park be safe, clean, fun, and beautiful 365 days a year from dawn to dusk for free. Right? It's just like any other public park, even though it's managed by a private nonprofit and donor and visitor supported. We want it to look and feel like a public park. So obviously, the questions that arose around this were the most critical ones. How in the face of COVID do we keep the park safe? How do we keep it clean? And one of the reasons we closed our bathrooms was not just that we could keep them clean for the visitor, but we also wanted to make sure that if we had staff going in there multiple times a day, having to clean much more often, that they could do so safely. Now, we are going to reopen those bathrooms soon because now we've had enough time to sort of put together a plan to do that. We feel like we understand, COVID in terms of how it interfaces with the park better than we did before. So we feel the customer values, the visitor values the same thing. The question is, what do we need to do to deliver that in a time in which safety is of paramount concern? The next thing is, what is our plan? Well, we did a big planning process last year. We got the board to approve a budget. And in 3 weeks, we had to throw that completely out the door and completely rebuild it. And we did that, as I said before, we reorganized our team. We made a commitment not to lay anybody off from our core team. We did freeze our seasonal hires. Those are not typically people that work for us year after year. It's usually a new group of people each year. But we made a commitment to keep our core team employed. And so we have wedding planners on tractors now, out there mowing and doing things. Our team has responded incredibly. And then we had to figure out how to preserve the cash we had, how to line up new cash, and how to reorganize our fundraising. And then we had to put in place measurements to track all that. And I'll show you the results of that in a minute. The trust the team one, I think, is pretty obvious. I have to say I trust our team implicitly, but I trust them 1,000 times or 1,000% more now than I did 2 months ago, even though I would have said it was at 100%. It's really been inspiring to be able to say to people, we need to get the job done. We have a lot less resources than we had before. I want each one of you to help us figure out how to do this. And they did. And again, I have, people who typically are working with brides planning meetings doing that. I've got educators who are, some days they're doing education, but other days they're working with our horticulture team or doing all kinds of things. And then we set up a kind of process of, we're actually getting more data now about what happens in the park than we did pre-COVID, which is one of the good things that's come out of this. So what are the results? Well, the first and most important result to me is that the parklands continue to be a safe, healthy place where people can, get outdoors, congregate in a different definition of that word, while maintaining social distance. And in fact, it turns out that a 3,700 acre park scattered along 19 to 20 miles with lots of different places where you can go has been probably the most used place in Louisville since COVID hit. Thankfully, the mayor and the governor did not shut down parks. And I don't say that just because we wanted to keep our park operating, but because so many people have told us the impact that the parklands has had. So that's the single most important result in all of this. However, there are other results that for us are really important. So our visitation, which was already, I told you last year was a record year, placing us in the top 40 most visited parks. It's gotten even higher. And that red line you see on the left that's spiking up to the top, that's 2020. And you can look at last year as the blue below it, that record year. So it gives you a sense of kind of, what's happening. And I'll drill down on that high dot, which is the month of April. So in April, we had 421,663 visits. And that was versus 325,691 visits last year in April. So our highest month ever, which was last August, was 380,000 visits. So we were 41,000 visits above our highest month ever. And again, that just gives you a sense of how important the parklands is to people in the middle of this COVID crisis. We always want to know what our visitors think. And when we first started this, we had a lot of, cards you could fill out in the park. Now it's mostly social media. And of course, people will instantly tell us what they think, good or bad. It's almost always good, but we appreciate the bad because it tells us, what's going on. But I'm just going to share with you on the screen a few of the responses that we got on social media during the COVID crisis in April. So this is, these are unsolicited. This a gentleman who said, I had a great time with my little buddy today hiking at the Parklands of Floyd's Fork, and he looks like he's with his son. A bit muddy, but some great views. The fresh air helped us feel almost normal. Highly recommended to reboot emotions and squash worry. We will be back at it as soon as we can. And again, that's very typical of the kinds of feedback we've gotten. Here's another kind of showing you the, how people get together but social distance safely. Enjoyed a fun Mother's Day ride with 3 of my favorite people. Vince not pictured. I'm assuming Vince is her husband, and that's her daughter and her granddaughter. And again, we see just tremendous numbers of family groups, small groups, under 10, typically 3 or 4, almost always families. We do get friends who meet out there and social distance. We've had a couple of issues, but literally a couple in 8 weeks. We've had 2 calls from the health department. We have rangers out there. The city has been very gracious. Metro Police have helped us. Both of them were groups of teens, probably 15 to 20 kids. They were very, as soon as our ranger, I think one case our ranger went out, another case it was a police officer. They immediately dispersed. They were non-confrontational. They were just being teenagers. And that's really, by and large, the extent of the complaints that we've received. Here's another one. Help keep our parks open longer by visiting them responsibly. We explored secluded areas of the parklands this morning to avoid busy times and maintain social distancing. Make Andy Bashir, Kentucky, and Team Kentucky proud. All right, so that gives you a sense of the 90% user and the results. I do want to talk briefly about our education program, because as part of this transition, within our mission, what are we going to do when the world changed? We asked our education, we have a great education team. We have an education director, an assistant director, and then 4 to 6 part-timers. They're all professional science educators, and we do a lot of STEM-based next generation science standards learning with JCPS. And for the last 2 or 3 years, all of our focus pretty much has been Title I schools. So we raise money, we bring these kids out for free. These are schools that really can't afford this, and we still have a lot of paying field trips too. But so all of a sudden that business went away, and so we asked our educators to come up with a plan, and they came up with a kind of multi-pronged plan. But it has sort of 2 main pieces. One is, what could they do in park to continue to help and support education, and also social distancing and messaging around safety and the virus and that kind of thing. And then we created a virtual classroom. So the first thing that they did in park is they, at one space on every mile of the 19.4 miles of the Louisville Loop out there, they put some kind of message. It might be an education message. Maybe there was a group of, birds kind of making a ruckus there throughout the morning, just to kind of, give them a sense of what those birds were. They did a lot of social distancing messaging. You can see that at the top of this picture. And then also just kind of feel good stuff, like we're going to get through this. So that's our folks doing the work. Here's a response. Loved all the positive messages left at the Parklands tonight. Couldn't get pics of some of the messages, hard to do when you're running, but whatever staff members were responsible, thank you. They were awesome. So again, just, seeing the response out there. WLKY got so excited about it, they came out and actually did a story on us. So that was nice, which you see here. And you can still find that if you want to watch it, if you didn't see it. So that's just an example of the way we repurposed our education staff, keeping them on the job, keeping them paid, keeping them working, but doing things. And honestly, this chalk art program will probably outlast COVID, because it's gotten such a positive response. We did have a little bit of issues with some kind of imitative other people coming out and giving chalk messages, but I think we've managed that pretty well so far. The other big thing is we started the Parklands virtual classroom. So we moved a lot of our field trip programming online. We adapted it for use by our partner schools and partner teachers. And then we added a lot of other things. We did some virtual hikes. We have a Wednesday Wonders, a pre-K program that we put online. And I want to show you the results here, because they're truly remarkable. So Wednesday Wonders, it's a pre-K program in the park every Wednesday. It serves, it's probably about 2/3 homeschool families, and then, or maybe half, and then the other half are just, folks who bring their kids out. On a typical week, we will serve 15 to 20 kids. The last 4 weeks, first of all, we didn't miss a week. Our educators converted this online without missing a single week. In the last 4 weeks, we have averaged over 1,000 participants. So we went from 15 to 20 to 1,000. This will definitely endure post-COVID. We do a lot of hikes in the park. We do a lot of educational hikes. Curtis Carmen, our education director, we have a program called Park Routes where we do speakers and things as well as hikes. We did our first one online 2 weeks ago. I think it was a tree ID. We had over 3,500 views and almost 10,000 shares. Again, just reached far more people through our virtual classroom than we did. Our virtual classroom, working with JCPS took a little bit longer to set up because we had to convert everything to Google Docs, once they sort of figured out how they were going to work. But in the last 2 to 4 weeks, we've had over 5,000 student interactions. So we work with 10 to 12 partner schools. Most of these have been pushed out through our partner schools. And we're in conversation with JCPS about whether, as they work out their out of school programs in the summer, any of this could be, converted or used, because our teachers all work with JCPS. Almost all of our programming is centered on their curricula. We know their science curricula really well. And so we're hopeful we can continue not just to support, on things that we've traditionally supported on, but that we actually might grow that relationship. So again, just to sum up, and then we'll go to Q&A. Hopefully I captured the essence of the Parklands for those who didn't know much about it. Hopefully you got a sense that our world changed very dramatically. And I didn't talk a lot about the revenue side, but we have, and Luke might be able to help with this. He's on our development committee if people have questions. We reduced our goal substantially, but we also reduced our costs substantially. And I'm quite confident we're already 40% towards our goal. And we've still got the rest of the year to raise it. So I'm very confident that will work. We learned a lot, but fundamentally, follow the training. We stuck to our mission. We stuck to our operating mission, trusted the team. They blew me away. If your team is well-trained, understands the mission, who better to execute the changes? And then my feeling is, and I'd love to hear feedback, that our results have been fantastic. We found that the Parklands is, if not more important in hard times as it's been for our city in good times. And, it's been a huge success. You could see that from the 2019 visitation, but even more important now. And that makes us feel good. I think we all have a sense of mission and service around that. We've been very impressed with Louisvillians and people who come in. They've really taken responsibility to social distance and to do what it takes to make sure we can keep the park open. So I'm delighted with the results. I'll open it up to Q&A. And again, I just want to say thanks. I love the Rotary. I always love coming to talk to you all. And I hope this has been helpful and instructive. Luke?
Let's see. Very good. Dan, first of all, thank you. That was a terrific presentation. We really, really appreciate it. And I just want to echo, having watched Dan and the staff react and respond to the COVID-19 situation. They've done a wonderful job, and they have not missed a beat. And the number of visitors is literally through the roof. So we're really, really happy about that. We have several questions here. Let me just dive right in. The first question is from Roland Blonick, and the question is, has the Parklands considered opening some toilets with an attendant who could sanitize between each use and perhaps put a donation box next to the toilet?
Okay, that's a really interesting idea. We have not thought about having an attendant. We are going to reopen our toilets hopefully before Memorial Day. And our current plan is to open all of them. So what I'm going to do, Roland, is I'm going to pass your suggestion on to our team. I think that, what we want to do is open them and evaluate, pretty quickly, do we think that we can keep them open safely? Again, the city has kept all of their public restrooms open in their parks throughout. They didn't close them at all. Again, we just did it, as an abundance of caution. To be very frank, we also have a lot of trees and woods that I'm sure people have used when they couldn't get to a restroom. That's, part of the advantage of the size of the park. I don't say that to be facetious. I say it because I'm sure it's happening. But in any case, Roland, that's a really interesting idea. And I'm going to pass that on to our team. If we do feel like we had to take it down to the level of individual cleanings, that would be an interesting way to do that. So thank you for that suggestion. I hope I answered your question.
Okay, next is just a comment from Riggs Lewis that I want to share with you. And the comment is, Dan, on behalf of everyone at Norton Healthcare, thank you to you and your leadership for your leadership during this crisis. It's a true tribute to your family's vision. So a very nice comment from Riggs.
Well, thank you, Riggs. I appreciate it. And they're a generous sponsor of our luncheon, which we had to cancel, but we've turned it into a 5-minute video, and our sponsors have pretty much all stayed with it, except a couple who just couldn't because of challenges. And they said they'd be back next year. But Riggs, thank you for the comment, and thanks to Norton for all you guys are doing. I know you've been in the thick of it, so I appreciate that very much.
All right, we have a couple of questions that are similar from Cynthia Miles Brown and also from David James. And basically the two questions ask, how do you measure the number of visitors to the park? Do you have car counters? Do you estimate the number of people per car? Or how do you do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I thought about explaining that when I was in the middle of it, but I forgot to do it. So we do have car counters. One of the things about the parklands that is different than, say, waterfront park, where waterfront people can come in on the downtown grid and park in different places. We have very discrete entrances, right? I think there are 8 entrances where a road comes into the park, and we have car counters at each one of those roads. And so we get a total count. Typically we do it monthly, but we've been doing it weekly because of the, just the very high visitation. So we get a number off each car counter. We total that, we divide by 2. We assume that every car that went in leaves, and that's been true for all cars except 2 or 3 that broke down or crashed or something over the years. And then we multiply by 2.5, which is kind of a national park standard for that. And so it's accurate, probably 5 to 10% either way. We are beginning to work with a company called El Toro that some of you may be familiar with. They're a Louisville company, kind of a big data analysis company. And they're going to be able to actually begin to help us, kind of ground truth those numbers. But they've been very consistent through the years. And, we've done some small samples that we think, again, they're within accuracy 5 to 10%. We actually think they're probably a little low. And I think they're probably low, especially during COVID, because so many of the groups that we see coming in are family groups. So, if you're just out there looking around, the pattern of use is different. Typically you'd see a great variety of group sizes. You'd see people by themselves, maybe a couple or something. You might see larger groups, particularly of teenagers. Now we see a lot of kind of 4, right, or 5, which is typically parents with their kids. You still see some of the others. We do obviously see a lot of walkers and runners and bikers by themselves, but the pattern has been quite distinctive. And I think that says that the average visit is probably a little higher than 2.5.
Okay, next question is from our Secretary, Chris Whalen. And Chris would like to know, are the virtual hikes that you mentioned available online all of the time, or are they scheduled?
So both. They are scheduled, and if you get on our website, www.theparklands.org, Chris, or anybody, you can find those on there. And then a scheduled hike will be broadcast live through social media, through Facebook, and then we keep them out there. So I think when we broadcast it the last time, of the 3,500 views, 100 people viewed it live, approximately. And then the rest of them, logged in at a different time. Typically, somebody shared it with them or showed it to them. So yes, you can get access to them that way. And if you jump on, I highly recommend, thanks, Chris, I see the thumbs up. Recommend just get on the virtual classroom page on our website. If you Google it, it'll pop up, and you can get a sense of the variety of the kinds of curricula that our teachers are providing, JCPS, as well as in-park stuff and online stuff. Great question.
Okay, and looks like our last question is from Todd Lanham, and being a member of the Development Committee on the Parklands, this one's near and dear to my heart as well. And the question is, what's the best way for us to financially support the work being done at the Parklands?
Well, that's pretty easy since the question was asked. It's donate to the Parklands Fund, and you can access that if you're in the park. Luke led us through a process of putting up some large signs that have QR codes. They have, you can text, or the simplest way is, if you're at home, is just to log on to the website. You can always mail it into 21st Century Parks. Again, we are a donor and visitor supported park. That's our lifeblood, and it is a tough year, but it's easy to do. We've made it easy to do so people can support us. And I mean, most importantly, obviously what you're supporting here, if last year we did 3,111,000 visits, I'd say we're probably going to, at the current trends, going to be somewhere around 3.3 to 3.5 million visits. That's what you're supporting. 365 days a year from dawn to dusk. It's safe, it's clean, it's fun, it's beautiful, and it's free. So thanks, Todd, for the question. That was not a planted question. But listen, I really appreciate, again, having the privilege and the opportunity to talk to Rotary. It's a great group. That just the energy, enthusiasm you guys bring to everything you do. Luke epitomizes it. David Wood epitomizes it. Every time I come to the meetings, it's like that. So I really appreciate you all asking the question. It's been one of the great learning experiences of my life to get through this crisis. And I'm sure that's true for all of us, whether it's in our personal lives or anything. But I've been really inspired by our team, by our board, and by our visitors, and just the fact that people come out in the face of this and they keep living their lives. So thank you very much. And thanks, Luke, again for inviting me.
Dan, thank you. And thanks again for coming. We really appreciate it. A great presentation. And I would just echo, for those of you who have not had a chance to visit the Parklands, by all means, hop in the car and go out and drive through it, walk through it. It's a fantastic system of parks, beautiful scenery, and boy, if you need to recenter yourself, that's a great place to go and do it.